Nothing like a pity clap. I appreciate that. Very kind of whoever started over here. Well, good morning, church. Good morning. I'd like to ask you a question this morning. If you had to summarize your life as it sits right now in 6 words, what words would you use to describe your life? 6 words. An online magazine a number of years ago asked this question to thousands of people, and it was based supposedly in part of a question asked to Ernest Hemingway, in which he was asked to write a 6-word story. And that story that he created is the now famous For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn. For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn. This magazine, this online magazine, received so many responses to their question that their website almost went down. And they took some of these responses and they put it into a book called Not Quite What I Was Planning. And here are some of the 6-word stories in that book. Not a good Christian, but trying. Another person wrote, cursed with cancer, blessed with friends. Now, this wasn't written by a wise old grandfather. This was written by a 9-year-old boy with thyroid cancer. Another person said, the psychic said I'd be richer. I'm kind of thinking if you would start wasting your money on psychics, you would be richer. Life has a way of going not quite like we planned. I remember a few years ago, I was flipping through the radio station, and I don't know what station I landed on, but the theme of the segment for that hour was the worst week ever. The worst week ever. And people were phoning in from all over the Houston area describing their worst week. And so one lady phoned in, and she described how she had met the man of her dreams. He was compassionate, he was kind, he was smart, he was good looking, he was everything that she wanted. And they had been dating for quite a while now, and they were making plans for their future. But that week, she found out that he was married. And she found out when the guy's wife tracked her down on Facebook and said, leave my husband alone. Not quite what she was planning. Another guy phoned in, and he said that he found out that his dad had a very rare form of cancer. And it's so rare that this is genetic, and all of his kids needed to be tested. And so all the kids went in, all the adult children went in, and he was tested. The doctor went in and said, look, I got bad news for you. There's not an easy way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. And the guy said, I have cancer, don't I? And the doctor said, no, actually you don't. You're quite healthy. And the guy said, well, then what's the bad news? And the doctor said, well, that guy waiting for you in the waiting room, he's not your dad. He's not your biological father. The guy had no idea, not quite what he was planning. Life has a way of going not quite like we planned. And this morning we're going to look at the book of Ruth. And we're going to look at a character named Naomi. And the book of Ruth takes us to the land of the down and outs. To this place where dreams are crushed and hope is shattered and lives are lost. It's the place of the not quite what I was planning. It's a place that nobody wants to go. And yet the book of Ruth begins here. So if you have a Bible, please turn to Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. If you don't have a Bible, grab that blue one in front of you on page 258. We're going to be jumping around quite a bit, so I encourage you to follow along. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. If we had to sum up Ruth's 6-word story, her life in 6 words, maybe it would go something like this. Got a family, they died, period, alone. Ruth 1:1. In the days when judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judea with his wife and 2 sons went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The next verse tells us the name of this man. It's Elimelech. And Elimelech means God is king. Well, if God is king, then he has a funny way of ruling, because as Naomi is going to find out, her life is not going to go as she planned. She's going to be hit again and again by the trials and the troubles of this life. And it all begins with hit number one. It all begins with a sickening word called famine. Famine hits the land. Famine hits Bethlehem, where Naomi is living. And that's very ironic because the word Bethlehem literally means house of bread. So the house of bread has no bread. And one of the toughest things to watch in your life is your children going hungry. And so hit number one, famine, quickly leads to hit number two, a move. In order to survive, Naomi and her family move. And now moving can be difficult in itself, but where they moved was very troubling. They moved to a place called Moab. Now, any Jewish person reading this story would automatically know that this was a broken story, because good Jewish people don't move to Moab. Not only was Moab an enemy of Israel, Moab was founded when two sisters got their father drunk, both slept with him, and from that incestuous relationship, some babies were born. One of them was called Moab. And you can read all about that in Genesis 19. And so pagan idolatry, sexual immorality, wild living came to define Moab. Think Jersey Shore meets Las Vegas meets 50 Shades of Grey, and you have a picture of Moab. Hit number one is a famine. Hit number two, there's a move. This leads us to hit number three, death. Death comes and claims Naomi's husband. We're not told why, all we're told is that he died. And the truth is, death's cold, icy hand will touch each one of us. 3 weeks ago tomorrow, my wife was, when she woke up, she looked at her phone and she saw that she had 8 missed calls from her best friend and 2 messages. Her phone was on silent. So when she phoned her best friend back, she quickly learned that her best friend's mother had died unexpectedly that morning. And she was a mess. Naomi felt the sting of death. Later, Naomi's 2 sons, they marry. And she's been in Moab for about 10 years when that enemy of all life comes again and claims the lives of her 2 boys, her 2 sons. And they die. And now we have 3 grieving widows. Not quite what they were planning. And so Naomi, she's had it. She can't take it anymore. The hits keep coming. She's done with it. And so she decides she's going to move back to Bethlehem. And she tells her 2 daughters, you stay here. I'm going to go. But her daughters-in-law want to go with her. But there's some tension in the text here that's easy to miss. Because in this culture, marriage was not primarily about romance like it is here. Marriage in this culture was primarily about survival. Economic survival. If you wanted your kids to survive in this life, the best way to do that is to get them married. But Naomi can't provide for her 2 daughters-in-law. She has no opportunity. She has no money. There's nothing she can give to them. She's going back to Israel probably to either live off the charity of a relative or to live the life of a beggar. She has nothing to give her daughters-in-law except for one thing. She can give them one gift, and that's the freedom of them having to care for her. If Naomi was out of the picture, maybe they could go get married and live happily ever after. And so she tells her daughters-in-law to stay here and marry. One of they argue with her, but one of them eventually takes her up on her offer and leaves. But her other daughter-in-law stays, and her name is Ruth. And she's the person that this book is named after. And she becomes the hero in this story, which is very ironic because Ruth is the outsider. She looks different than everybody else. She speaks differently than everybody else. She is the pagan in the story, but yet she becomes the hero. And so Ruth and Naomi, they jump into their Volkswagen and they drive back to Israel, And they pull up to Bethlehem, and as they get out of the car, I know they didn't have cars back then, just in case you're wondering, they arrive in Bethlehem at the village, and some people recognize that Naomi, and they say, hey, look, it's Naomi. And here we see the final thing that Naomi has lost. Remember, she's lost her food, her home, her husband, her children. And now we see that she's losing her faith. See, the people see Naomi and they say, hey, look, there's Naomi. But look how she responds. Verses 16 and 17. Naomi said, don't, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, which means pleasant and sweet, by the way? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. And then earlier in verse 13, she said, no, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. The name Mara means bitter. She doesn't want to be called Naomi, pleasant and sweet anymore. She wants to be called bitter, old woman, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. And it's easy to miss the significance of what's happening here, because in our culture, we don't put much weight on the meaning of somebody's name. But in the Old Testament, names were closely associated with somebody's identity, with their character. That's why the names of God in the Bible are so important, because they reveal a little bit of who God is, what He is like, what He has promised to do, what He will do, what He has done. It's His identity. And so that's why if you read the Psalms, or if you listen to modern worship music, or sing some of our old hymns, we sing phrases like, bless the name of the Lord, praise the name of the Lord, lift up the name of the Lord. We're not talking about a title, we're talking about a character. We're worshiping God for who He is. And that's easy to miss because we look at names as a title. I mean, let's do an experiment. If you know the meaning of your name, raise your hand. If you don't, all right, thank you. If you don't know the meaning of your name, raise your hand. Some of you are confused. Really, you can only go one way. Okay, so it looked like most of us don't know the meaning of our names. And so I wanted to be sure, so I looked up the meaning of my name. And I went onto the Baby Names website, and the Celtic meaning of the word Kenneth means, and I'm not making this up, handsome. And I knew that there would be some skeptics out there. So I looked up the American meaning. And you know what it means? It means handsome. And if you're not convinced, I looked up the Scottish meaning of the word Kenneth, and you know, it means handsome. It wasn't until I looked up the English version that I got a different answer. And you know what it means in the English? It means fair looking. And I know what some of you are thinking. Someone got something very wrong somewhere. We don't put much weight behind the meaning of names like they did back then. But she changed her name. And that's still a strange thing to do in our culture and her culture. Can you imagine if I stood on this stage and I said, hey, friends, nobody in this room call me Kenneth anymore. You don't have permission to call me Kenneth. My new name is Disowned. Call me Disowned. You might ask, well, why do you want to be called Disowned? Imagine if I responded, because the Lord has disowned me. You might, through your deductive powers of reasoning, figure out that there's a problem between me and God. And that's what's happening here with Naomi. She's angry and she's hurt. And maybe her 6-word story should read, famine, move, death, forsaken. Nothing left. There's nothing left. She's angry, and maybe some of you feel the same way. Maybe you've lost someone that was close to you. You had words that you wanted to say. You had things that you wanted to do. But now you won't get that chance, and you're angry. Maybe there's an opportunity that passed you by, and you're afraid it's never going to come again. Maybe you had plans for your future, but through a series of events, it just hasn't gone the way that you wanted, and you're wondering, where is God? What is He doing? That describes you. We would do well to remember the lesson of Naomi, because though she thought God was not moving, though she claimed that God wasn't there, the truth is that God was up to something. In fact, God would use her broken story to be a part of the greatest story ever told, the story of Jesus Christ Himself. And this leads us to the main point that I want to talk about this morning. If somebody were to ask you later in this week, hey, what did you learn in church? I hope you would say this. I hope that you'll take this and put it in your heart, because you're going to need this in this life. The one thing is this: just because things look hopeless doesn't mean all hope is gone. Just because things look hopeless doesn't mean all hope is gone. I remember a number of years ago, my eldest son, Michael, I don't know how old he was, but he was probably that tall. He had the unfortunate privilege of getting a splinter. And this wasn't just any splinter. This was the king of all splinters. I mean, that splinter was like that big by that thick. It was more like it was a big splinter with a little bit of Michael on top. This thing was huge. At least you would have thought that by how Michael was responding to it. And so let me ask you, what do you do with a splinter? You pull it out. And so I went and got the tweezers, and we went to pull it out, and my son lost his mind. No, we can't do that. Why is this happening? And my wife very gently, very compassionately, like she does, and she is, said, but Michael, we can't leave it in there. We have to pull it out. If we leave it in there, it'll be infected, then it'll hurt even more. We got to do this now. Hey, just a little bit of pain, and then it'll be gone, and you can go do what you want to do. And Michael said these words, and I'm quoting them to you. But Mom, he probably said Mom, but Mom, you don't understand. You've never experienced pain like this before. Mom, you don't get it. You've never been here before. You've never had pain like this in your life before. What are you talking? You can't understand. Why is this happening to me? You've never experienced pain like this before. To which my wife very compassionately responded and started to describe to Michael the slight discomfort of giving birth. Twice. Needless to say, the splinter came out. But sometimes when we are hurting, sometimes when we are in pain, all we can see is the pain. All we can see is the hurt. We can't imagine why there would be a reason behind this. Why would God allow this to come into my life? It's not fair. Listen to the words of Tim Keller. He said this: just because you can't see or imagine why God would allow something bad to happen doesn't mean that there can't be one. Doesn't mean that they can't be one. Just because things look hopeless does not mean all hope is gone. Naomi and Ruth found hope in two places, and I want to point them out today this morning because we can find hope there as well. The first place they found hope was in community. In community. When Naomi and Ruth had nothing, they held on to each other. They served each other. They loved each other. They cared for each other. Ruth provided food for Naomi. Naomi gave Ruth dating advice. And through a series of hold your breath moments and Christ-like redemption, Ruth met a compassionate man by the name of Boaz and married him. All this happened. They survived. All this happened under the umbrella of community. Because they were together, they were better for it. Pastor Joshua Harris said these words: the Christian life is a race, but it's a race that we run together. Let me pause for a moment and ask you a question. Who are you running this race with? Who are you in community with? When life hits you, and it will, when life hits you, who can you turn to? Who can you ask for help? Whose shoulder can you cry on? Remember about 4 months ago or so, I was in my office, and I got a phone call from a lady in our church, and she wanted prayer. And she wanted prayer because the water in her house had been turned off. And she didn't ask for anything, just prayer. And she said that she was going to take her kids to a friend's house and bathe them and then come back, and they're going to do that for half a week until they get paid and they can turn their water back on. Of course, we couldn't allow that to happen, and we were able to help turn the water back on. It's what the church does. It's what the church should do. I got off the phone and I started praying for her and her husband and her family, and then a thought occurred to me. If they are struggling with the water bill, what else are they struggling with? I mean, if the water was just turned off, how are they doing on food? How are they doing on paying their electricity bill? I don't know, but I contacted 3 men in their community group. And I said, hey, this is confidential. You share this with anybody, I'll kill you. But you have somebody in your group that their water was just turned off. And I'm worried about food and other things. Would you be willing to kick in $50? Between 4 people, $50, that's $200. That'll go a long way in helping them. And within 2 hours, they had all responded and said they could help. And they raised, between the 4 of us, over $600 that we were able to give to this family in need. Now, these men in that group, they were under no obligation to help. Nobody knew that I was even asking. But they did it. Why? Because they're in community with each other. Because they know each other. They love each other. They serve each other. Who are you in community with? Henry Blackaby and Claude King said these words: you cannot be in true fellowship with God and out of fellowship with your fellow Christians. Naomi and Ruth found hope in community. The second place they found hope was in God. The second place they found hope was in God himself. Naomi claimed that God had turned his back on her, that he was against her, that he had forsaken her. But what Naomi didn't see was that God was not leaving her story. God was redeeming her story. He wasn't absent, but active in more ways than she could possibly imagine. And what's true for Naomi is true for you and me. Let's turn to the end of this story. Please turn to Ruth chapter 4. Starting with verse 13, we're going to go down to 17. Ruth chapter 4, 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will," verse 15, "he will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Verse 16. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. So think about this. Chapter 1 takes us quickly to a funeral. Chapter 4 takes us to a wedding. Chapter 1, there's death. In chapter 4, there's life. In chapter 1, hope is lost. In chapter 4, hope is found. And after seeing Naomi take some of the hardest hits that life can throw at a person, we now see her sitting in the place of the blessed. She is blessed, and other people recognize that and are calling her blessed. One more time, look at verse 17. Some of the women living there said, "Naomi has had a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Think about this. Ruth and Naomi, because of family dynamics in this culture, they became the great-grandmother of King David. You know King David, the greatest king that Israel ever had. David, the giant killer. David, the guy who wrote part of the Bible. David, who was a person like you and me, who was tempted in various ways. Sometimes he fell into temptation. Sometimes he overcame temptation. David, whom the Bible describes as the man after God's own heart, came from Naomi and Ruth. This story has an incredible ending. God was working after all. And because we get to skip to chapter 4, we get to see what Naomi and Ruth couldn't see. That in the midst of their pain, God had a plan. In the midst of their fears, God was faithful. In the midst of their trials, God was still trustworthy. Just because things look hopeless doesn't mean all hope is gone. The BBC not too long ago did a story on a guy named Reuben Hill, and Reuben was at university studying for his PhD. And he was just doing his homework one day when he got a bit of a headache. And he took some medicine for the headache, but it didn't go away. The next day it was there. He took some more medicine, but nothing he did, no medication that he took, would take this headache away. And eventually, over the course of a week or two, it just became this thumping, massive headache that just was with him every second of the day. And he knew something was wrong. He knew something was wrong. And so he went to the doctor, and the doctors ran some tests, and it was discovered that he had an incurable tumor. This tumor would take his life in a matter of months. And so Reuben asked, "Is there anything we can do?" And they said no. Not quite what he was planning. And so his doctor connected with other doctors, and they connected with other doctors to see if there was something they could do for Reuben. And they discovered a doctor who had a very experimental procedure that they could do. And so he and Reuben spoke, and he said, this is high risk. Never been done before. High risk, highly experimental. But at this point in Reuben's life, he was already starting to go downhill. And he knew in a matter of months his life would be over. And so he took the risk. He decided to have the surgery. And the BBC, because the surgery was so experimental, they wanted to record it and do a documentary on it. And so they were in the operating room while Reuben was being operated on. So there was a camera, a reporter, doctors, nurses, and they went into how they did it and all that. I don't even understand. But because of where the tumor was, they needed to know if they damaged his brain while they were removing it. And the only way to do that was to wake him up and have him sing. If he couldn't sing, then they would have to do that meant they would have to do something else. And so, with half of his skull missing, with his brains hanging out, after this surgery, in the middle of the surgery, they woke him up. And they said, "Hey, Reuben, we told you about this. We need you to sing something." "Reuben, hey, Reuben, can you sing us something? Reuben, are you with us? Can you sing?" And Reuben started to sing these words. "The sun comes up. It's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O my soul. Worship his holy name. Sing like never before, O my soul. I'll worship your holy name." Here's a 1-minute clip of that surgery.
Reuben's tumor is near the part of the brain that controls speech, and that can be easily damaged. That's why the team are now gently waking him up so that he can help them with the next phase of the operation. As the surgeons remove the last pieces of tumor, Reuben is asked to sing.
The sun comes up, it's a new day dawn.
This shows what they are cutting will not affect his speech.
Again, whatever may pass and whatever.
It's the culmination of a remarkable piece of surgery.
Oh, my son, worship your holy name.
2 months on, and with the support of his family, Reuben is well on the road to recovery. The tumour was not cancerous, and he's looking forward to getting back to his PhD and to singing.
Pretty powerful story, huh? Yes. Matt Redman was the man who wrote the song 10,000 Reasons that he sung. And when he was watching the BBC, he saw this documentary. And of course, he was blessed by it. And so he found a way to get in contact with Reuben Hill. And he asked him a question. He said, why did you sing that song? You could have chosen thousands of songs. Why this one? And Reuben said he wanted to sing a song of thanks, a song of praise, and a song of trust. Just because things look hopeless doesn't mean all hope is gone. One of the best ways to fix a broken story is to take that story and embed it into a bigger story that starts and ends with God. God used Naomi's broken story to bring about Israel's greatest king, King David. And you know who came from King David, right? The greatest king this world has ever seen. Jesus Christ himself, the one who would come to save humanity from our sins and free us, came from a broken story, from a pagan woman from Moab. Just because things look hopeless doesn't mean all hope is gone. Maybe Naomi's story should actually read something like this. My God was always in control. In just a moment, Tony's going to sing a special. As we were planning on how to close this service, she found a song and she said, this is it. And I listened to it, read through the lyrics, and she was right. This song is my sermon in song format. It's a perfect way to end it. And then after that, we're going to sing 2 choruses of 10,000 Reasons. But before we do, I want to ask you a question. This is what I want you to think through as Tony is singing this song. I want to ask you, where are you this morning? Where do you find yourself? Are you in chapter 1 of Ruth, dealing with pain and loss? Things hurt right now? I want to challenge you to put your hope in God. Maybe you're in chapter 2. We didn't get to it this morning, but chapter 2 is all about survival, all about trying to get used to the new normal. If that's you, put your hope in God. Maybe you're in chapter 3 and you're dealing with anticipation. If this thing and this thing and this thing and everything, these things just kind of come together in a line, I might make it through this. Put your hope in God. Maybe you're in chapter 4 where you're being blessed. Put your hope in God, because your blessings don't come from you. They come from God. Just because things look hopeless doesn't mean all hope is gone. Maybe this morning you have a broken story. Put it in God's story. Surrender your life to Jesus. Let him be the leader of your life, and he would take your life. He would do something with it. He will use it to further his kingdom, to bless other people. You may not see it, but God is working, and he's working now. Please listen to this song.